Hey guys, Travis Gillespie here. Today we're going to be looking at three-dimensional geometry, and I'm writing this word up on the screen. It says polyhedron. Now I have this word polyhedron on the screen. The reason I'm writing it is because you're going to see polyhedrons in three-dimensional geometry all the time. This is just a really fancy word for saying you have a 3D or three-dimensional object. So I'm just going to write 3D object. There's more to the definition than this, but I don't want to get too complicated. Let's keep the math simple. So a polyhedron, it's a fancy term for saying you have a 3D object that's made up of, I'm just going to write that down, made up of flat surfaces. Now I said it's made up of flat surfaces. Another way of thinking about it is it's made up of two-dimensional shapes, figures, or objects, or 2D shapes. So let's go ahead and write that down. A polyhedron, it's a three-dimensional object or a 3D object that's made up of 2D shapes. So 2D shapes make up this three-dimensional figure. Now I want to get a little bit more room on the screen, so let's go ahead and move polyhedrons over to the side, and we're actually just going to scroll up just a little bit. Okay. Now there are two different types of polyhedrons we're going to talk about. I'm just going to go back to green real quick and create a little bit of a bracket here. So we have pyramids, I'm going to write that here. And we also have another type of polyhedron known as a prism. Let's talk about pyramids real quick. I've got to go back to that pink. Pyramids, they're just like polyhedrons, so they're three-dimensional shapes. I'm going to write down 3D shape. Another way of thinking about this is that they're a 3D solid. Their base shape is a polygon, so they have a polygon base. Okay, so it has a polygon base. So let's go ahead and just get a shape up on the screen. I'm just going to put a square here. So it could have a different shape, but we're going to say that our polygon base is a square, and all of its faces are made up of triangles. So it has a triangular face or triangular faces. Okay, so we have triangular faces here. I want to choose a new color because all of these faces that we have, they taper up to one point. Let's create one point up top here, and what I'm going to do is connect each corner or vertex here up to this point. So let's go ahead and just use dotted lines for these back two side edges or side walls here. So here's one triangular face, and now the next two should be a little bit easier. Cool, so here we are. Now one of our goals that we're going to have in drawing our three-dimensional shapes is just practicing, because these pictures don't have to be perfect, but as you practice they'll get better in time, and they represent the shape that you're looking at, and as long as you understand what shape you're dealing with, the better off you are going to be in understanding three-dimensional geometry. So we have a pyramid up on the screen. It's a 3D shape. It has a polygon base. It's that square on the bottom, and triangular faces. And these triangular faces, they taper up to one point, or they travel up to one point. It's another way of thinking about it. And this one point at the top, it's called a vertex, and we'll talk about this vertex or vertices later in the future. So vertex here. And let's talk about prisms now. So I'm going to change my colors back to pink, and I'm going to put down a 3D. It's a 3D shape because it's a polyhedron. So we have 3D shapes, and prisms have polygon bases as well. So polygon bases, and these base shapes, they're identical. So the base shapes, I'm going to write down that they're congruent. And parallel. So the base shapes, they're congruent and parallel, and the other faces for this prism are either rectangles, so let's write down that the other faces they're rectangles, or parallelograms. So the faces that you'll be seeing mainly this year will mostly be those rectangular faces. I'm not sure that you'll see any faces that are shaped like parallelograms. So if I were to draw one of these prisms up on the screen, let's see what one of them would look like. So what we're going to do here is just try to create a parallelogram real quick. Okay, and this isn't looking to be too perfect, but that's okay. So we've got a base shape, and what I want to do from here is try to create a another base that's identical to this in parallel. Well, the way that it will help you out is if you just draw those, we're going to call these table legs here. So just those table legs, and you can draw them upward, and let's get rid of one of those. And I'm going to do the same thing here. They're about the same level there, and let's do that here as well. And then from here, what you'll be able to do is create the other base shape. So I'm going to draw that in pink again. Here we are. I just need a little bit more room. Okay, well, we have a shape. It's sort of taking three-dimensional form here. It's running side to side, left and right. It's running up and down, and front to back. The same thing over here with the pyramid. It's running side to side, up and down, and front to back. But what's the difference between a pyramid and a prism? Well, it's pretty simple. A pyramid, all of the faces taper up to one point or a vertex. Whereas the prism, all of these, we're going to call them legs, kind of like a table leg, they travel upward to different points. Therefore, they don't have one vertex or a shared point at the top. Another way of thinking about this is the prism, it has two bases. Well, there's a base on the bottom, and there's also, well, it's really the top here, but we could also call it a base, and they're parallel to one another. They're congruent and they're identical shapes, the top and bottom shape. Cool, so we have prisms, pyramids, and they're both polyhedrons. Now there's one more type of shape that we're going to look at in three-dimensional geometry. I'm going to write it over here, and I needed to get my new color, so we're going to write that these are cylinders. And in fact, I just want to create the word cylinder. Cylinders are not polyhedrons. I'm just going to make that note. And the reason cylinders are not polyhedrons is that not every face is a polygon. Let's make that note. So let's write that down. Not every face is a polygon. And I can draw one below here. So let's just pretend that we have a circle here. In fact, let's get a circle up on the screen. Here we are, there's our circle, and I'm going to choose a new color real quick. I'm going to draw a leg going down from here, and also on the other side. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to change colors again, and make this front part of the circle, well, it looks solid, but then I'm going to use a dotted line to represent the back side of this cylinder. So it has a circular base and a circular base on top as well. But not every face here is a polygon. Later we're going to look at nets and how we can actually break these shapes up into nets. Later we're going to look at how we can break these shapes up into something called nets, which help us look at each individual 2D shape a little bit better. Before we end this video, what I want to do is talk about pyramids and prisms just for a little bit longer. Pyramids and prisms, let's get some room on the screen here. So pyramids and prisms, these are general names. Let's create a bracket. This one's going to be for pyramids and prisms. Pyramids and prisms can have more specific names, and those specific names are named based off of their base shape. So let's rewrite that word pyramid. And let's rewrite that word prism. And then over off to the side here, I'm going to choose 3 different names that we can look at. What if the base was a triangle? Well, you would call it, if it was a pyramid, so if the base shape was a triangle and the shape was a pyramid, you would call it a triangular pyramid. If the base shape was a triangle and it was a prism, you would call it a triangular prism. In fact, over here, I want to just change colors real quick, and we're going to note that these are the base shapes here. So base shapes. And let's just look at two more real quick. What if we had a square base? Well, then you would call it, if it was a pyramid, a square pyramid. If the base shape was a square and it was a prism, you would call it a square prism, or simply a cube. And then finally, let's look at one last one. If you had a rectangular base. So if you had a rectangular base, well, you would call it, if it was a pyramid, a rectangular pyramid. If you had a rectangular base and it was a prism, you would call it a rectangular prism. Cool stuff, guys. I'll see you in future videos.